what we're trying to do here is like bring in a shared definition around what we're referring to in woo culture. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a element of it that's dominated by whiteness and new age wellness and spirituality that's dominated by whiteness. And um, this idea of woo woo that is not critical, that is not decolonial, that looks at spirituality as this really rigid way that is
Yeah.
also tied to spiritual bypassing, you know, that this idea that spirituality is all positive and love and light, and
Mhm.
um, there are no hard, difficult feelings. If you have feelings that are deemed negative, then you're not really spiritual, right? That
Mhm.
referring to woo woo culture that is really dominated by like US, new age, white kind of this spirituality that has become like this $1 million, maybe $1 billion industry now, and that we know in the last couple years have led to certain pipelines,
Yeah.
you know, that has certain pipelines, conservative pipelines, dehumanizing kind of, you know, like this is what we're referring to. And the truth of it is, friends, as us who are spiritual aware, spiritually inclined, we have to be very careful. And there is an invitation here, which is why we're doing this workshop, to really root ourselves in our values and ethics, um, and not be complicit in the idea that we like shop for spirituality and spiritual practices. I know I'm going ahead. I'm gonna stop myself here, but this idea, this notion of woo-woo culture, I saw it in tarot. You know, I've been reading tarot for a really long time, and before it was like popular now, where there's nothing but all these decks and everybody. Now it's like it feels really normalized, quote unquote, that everybody is related to tarot in some way, and that you can find tarot decks anywhere you go now. Um, but I think, truthfully, it's a product of woo woo culture in a way, because there's also this element of it that this idea of like tarot and like not acknowledging Romani people is the reason we know tarot. Like, there's people don't know that. People are like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, like the reason we know tarot is because of this group of people who've experienced persecution and violence still. And this was the lifeline that they had, like their practice with tarot. Now, of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't practice tarot, because the way that the Romani practice tarot are uniquely specific to their heritage and their ethnic group, and like their practices is it is closed. But I think there's this way that in US and mainstream culture that we're like just buying, we're consuming spirituality and not being aware of the implications of that. Um, we buy crystals, but then we don't realize, hey, are these crystals being ethically sourced? You know, for a long time, people were really buying sage and not realizing that there's actually, we have to be very careful. We shouldn't be buying sage. And this is something that belongs to Native Americans and First Nation folks and Indigenous folks. Like, yes, we know that, but there's still things that we don't know. And I think as spiritual therapists, specifically spiritual therapists, we have to be in relationship to that. We have to be in relationship to the fact that woo-woo culture is right there with us. We have to be critical. And we have to keep like building that awareness of like, okay, am I going to this spiritual training on the weekend? Who am I learning from? What does this mean as a white person or as a non-indigenous person or as a, you know, is that okay for me to do, right? Or like just being in relationship to that, which was true for me when I learned. I was always drawn to like energy work, and I wanted to practice Reiki for I think since like '99. I was like, oh, but I just didn't think, I didn't feel like it was mine, my tradition. And then when I finally decided to lean into it, it didn't feel right. You know, I was just like, I'm really honoring this practice. And I'm also acknowledging like, this is not for me to practice. And I'm glad that I'm finally leaning into the wisdom of my ancestors and learning that like energy work is a part of my tradition, but like Reiki isn't. And that feels true to me. No judgment to other people. who feel really drawn to the medicine. And yeah, I know the history of Reiki in the US. The people who brought Reiki here, the founders, with the intention to spread Reiki here in the US. But just for me, it didn't feel right. It felt like just not right for me in my ethics around my decolonial healing practices, which is like a daily practice. You don't like decolonize your healing one time and then you stop because we live in woo woo culture. That's not possible. Woo woo culture is in everything, it's embedded in everything. So we have to be in a daily practice of decolonial healing. I'm going to pause.